Oklahoma's next scheduled execution will move forward after a decision today by the Pardon and Parole Board.
Our KOCO's Evan Onstad is here. Evan, this inmate was convicted of killing his common-law wife more than 20 years ago.
That's right. This here is Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez. He was sentenced to die after killing Olympia Fisher at an Oklahoma City home in 2003. Police say he shot Fisher in both eyes, and police at that time described the scene as gruesome and chaotic. Fisher's 18-year-old pregnant daughter also witnessed this, and today Pardon and Parole Board members voted 3-1 to deny him clemency. The coalition to abolish the death penalty say that they are saddened by the vote, saying the board ignored Cuesta Rodriguez's neurodevelopmental and psychiatric realities. Attorney General Gintner Drummond says Fisher's family endured heartbreak for 23 years and that justice will be served when he is put to death. His execution is scheduled for August 13th.
The narrator then introduces a significant event in the U.S. death penalty system. Assuming no last-minute legal changes occur, 3 executions are scheduled to take place on the same day, August 13th, in 3 different states. The inmates are identified as Anthony Hines in Tennessee, Jeremy Tremaine Williams in Alabama, and Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez in Oklahoma. The narrator explains that the focus of this episode will be Rodriguez's case. To emphasize how uncommon this event is, the narrator provides historical context. He notes that the last time 3 death row inmates were executed on the same day in the United States occurred 16 years earlier, when Louisiana, Ohio, and Texas each carried out an execution on January 7, 2010. He further mentions that Arkansas remains the last state to execute 3 inmates on a single day within one state, doing so in January 1997. He adds another historical fact, explaining that 4 different states carried out executions on the same day in December 1999. Finally, he states that since the reinstatement of capital punishment in 1976, 3 executions occurring on the same day have happened only 13 times, making the upcoming executions another rare event if they proceed as planned. This historical overview is intended to demonstrate the significance of the scheduled execution date before narrowing the story to one individual. The narrative then shifts entirely to Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez. The narrator explains that Rodriguez was a Cuban immigrant who arrived in the United States in 1980, the same year as the Mariel boat lift, a major migration event in Cuban-American history. The narrator briefly explains the political circumstances surrounding the boat lift, claiming that Cuban leader Fidel Castro allowed large numbers of people to leave Cuba, including prisoners and patients from psychiatric institutions. He speculates that because Rodriguez arrived in the United States during that year, he may have been part of this migration, although he acknowledges that there is no direct evidence confirming this. Likewise, he notes that it is unknown whether Rodriguez had been among the prisoners released during the Exodus. The narrator continues by describing Rodriguez's life after arriving in America. Although little is publicly known about his early years, records indicate that he accumulated legal problems, including a drug conviction in 1988. To provide cultural context, the narrator briefly references the 1983 film Scarface, starring Al Pacino, noting that the movie begins with events related to the Mariel boat lift. This comparison is used to help viewers understand the historical background of Rodriguez's immigration. Despite his earlier criminal record, the narrator explains that Rodriguez reportedly attempted to rebuild his life following the drug conviction. According to available reports, his most significant personal problem became heavy alcohol consumption. Eventually, he settled in Oklahoma City, where he met Olympia Carolina Fisher, a hardworking woman and mother of 2 daughters. Their relationship would ultimately become the center of the tragic events explored in the remainder of the documentary. By all outward appearances, it seemed as though Cuesta Rodriguez had finally turned his life around. After his 1988 drug conviction, reports suggest he worked hard to rebuild his life. Aside from struggling with heavy drinking, there were few signs that his past would define his future. He eventually settled in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, hoping for a fresh start. But beneath that seemingly ordinary life, something far darker was brewing. It was there that he met Olympia Carolina Fisher, a hardworking single mother who had immigrated from Chihuahua, Mexico, in search of a better life. Born in 1959, Olympia spent years working long, physically demanding shifts as a packer for a moving company, doing everything she could to provide for her 2 daughters, Katea Chacon and Cynthia Chacon. By 2002, Olympia and Cuesta had become serious enough to buy a house together. To outsiders, it looked like they were building a future, but behind closed doors, that future was about to come to a horrifying end. At the time, Olympia's oldest daughter, 18-year-old Cuelos, was pregnant and living in the home. Then came a moment that would change her life forever. She heard a gunshot. It was the sound of her mother being shot. In an instant, the family's world shattered. What's especially unsettling is how ordinary Cuesta Rodriguez appeared to everyone around him. Public records reveal little about his career beyond describing him as a laborer, but those who worked with him painted the picture of a dependable, hard-working man. During his trial, his employer and several co-workers spoke in his defense. They praised his dedication, exceptional work ethic, and willingness to help others. His employer trusted him so deeply that he had even loaned him $5,000, a remarkable sign of confidence. To those who knew him professionally, he wasn't seen as a violent man. Which makes what happened next even more difficult to comprehend. For a brief time, Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez and Olympia Fisher appeared to be building a life together. The house they purchased became their shared home, and in many reports, Olympia was described as his common-law wife. But almost as soon as they moved in, everything began to unravel. According to Olympia's daughter, Cuelos, Carlos became consumed by jealousy. He couldn't accept the long hours Olympia worked and convinced himself she was seeing someone else. Whenever Olympia or Cuelos left the house, he constantly called them, demanding to know where they were and who they were with. The arguments became relentless. Eventually, Carlos demanded that Olympia pack her belongings and leave the house. At the same time, Olympia was desperately trying to force him out instead. Then came a warning that, tragically, went nowhere. On May 20, 2003, just 11 days before the murder, Olympia walked into a police station covered in bruises on her arm and stomach. She reported domestic abuse. An officer told her he would photograph the injuries and immediately arrest Carlos. But before he could, Olympia changed her mind. She quietly stood up, said, "Never mind," and walked out. No arrest was made. 11 days later, the worst-case scenario became reality. On the evening of Friday, May 30th, Carlos had been drinking tequila when he called Olympia's cell phone. As usual, he demanded to know where she was. She told him she was at work. Carlos would later claim he drove to her workplace but didn't see her there, convincing himself she had lied. He said he returned home and went to bed. But the evidence told a different story. Around 10 p.m., Cuelos arrived home to find the house completely dark. After switching on the lights, she discovered an empty bottle of tequila and a profanity-filled note apparently addressed to both her and her mother. Then she heard Carlos coughing in the master bedroom. Unable to reach Olympia by phone, Cuelos drove to her mother's workplace. After finishing her shift, the two stopped at McDonald's for a late meal before returning home. They agreed it was finally time to move out, but decided to get some sleep first and pack in the morning. They never got the chance. At approximately 4:30 a.m. on May 31st, Cuelos woke to the sound of a heated argument. She rushed toward the voices and begged her mother to come into her bedroom, hoping to separate the two. Instead, Carlos followed Olympia through the house. When Olympia reached for a phone to call police, Carlos ripped it from her hands and threw it aside. Then he pulled out a double-barreled .45 caliber pistol loaded with shotgun shells. He fired. She pleaded with dispatchers, telling them her mother had been shot, but was still alive and trying to escape. Neither Olympia could get out, nor could police get in. While officers desperately tried to force the front door open, she was 43 years old. Police immediately called in a SWAT team and hostage negotiators. After repeated commands failed, SWAT forced entry into the house and arrested Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez without further violence. By then, television news crews had already arrived, broadcasting the tragic scene. The case finally went to trial in June 2007, nearly 4 years later. That same month, Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Now 70 years old, he remains on Oklahoma's death row and is one of 3 inmates scheduled for execution on August 13th, unless his clemency request is granted. His attorneys argue that he was so intoxicated that night he shouldn't receive the death penalty. But witnesses told a different story. Despite drinking tequila, those who saw him described him as steady on his feet, speaking clearly, and fully aware of what he was doing. Cuelos herself testified that he appeared completely in control. And with that testimony, the jury rejected his defense.